I can still taste the gingerbread when I remember that night. Sweet and spicy, just like the revenge I served alongside my mother's famous holiday ham. The flames from our hand-dipped beeswax candles reflected in Michael's eyes as realization dawned. Not the warm twinkle of Christmas lights, but the cold fire of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. "Everyone," he had announced so confidently moments before, "this is Vanessa. I mentioned she might join us since her family's in London this year." His hand rested on the small of her back, a gesture once reserved for me, as he guided her into our dining room where 3 generations of our family waited. Vanessa, with her cashmere sweater and professionally highlighted hair. Vanessa, who was definitely not Michelle from HR, as he described when warning me about this dinner guest. Vanessa, who couldn't hide her surprise when Michael introduced me as my wife Kate, instead of whatever lie he had told her about our marital status. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply smiled, passed the cranberry sauce, and waited for dessert. Because tucked between the Christmas pudding and my grandmother's heirloom serving platters sat a manila envelope with documents that would transform this painfully awkward family dinner into the moment Michael learned who truly held the power in our marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I met Michael during my final year at Georgetown, where I was completing my master's in commercial real estate development. He was guest lecturing, all confidence and charisma in his tailored suit, explaining how he'd transformed a failing property management company into the fastest-growing commercial development firm in the Mid-Atlantic region. I was impressed by his business acumen. He was impressed by my questions. 3 years later, we were married on the rooftop garden of his first major development project. The early years were everything I'd hoped for when imagining my adult life. We were partners in the truest sense, Michael handling the client-facing aspects of the business we built together, me managing the financial strategy and operations. Duncan Reed Properties grew from a 2-person operation to a regional powerhouse with 30 employees and a portfolio that made our competitors envious. When I discovered I was pregnant with Sophia, we made adjustments. Michael took on more visible leadership, while I shifted to a more flexible schedule. By the time Ethan came along 2 years later, we'd established a rhythm. I worked remotely 3 days a week, came into the office for important meetings, and our corporate childcare center, my pet project and proudest achievement, made it possible to balance motherhood with the career I loved. The change was so gradual I almost missed it. A decision made without consulting me. A client meeting I wasn't invited to. Documents I would normally review that somehow never reached my desk. "Just streamlining things," Michael would explain. "You're so busy with the kids and the foundation work. I don't want to overwhelm you." His concern seemed genuine. After all, besides work and family, I had taken on chairing the Housing Rights Foundation we'd established after securing a particularly profitable downtown development deal. Michael appeared supportive, proud even, as I accepted a community leadership award for our initiative providing affordable apartments for healthcare workers. "My wife," he told everyone at the gala, his arm wrapped around my waist, "has the biggest heart and the sharpest mind of anyone I know. Duncan Reed wouldn't be half as successful without her vision." That was 5 years ago. The last time I remember feeling like a true partner. Looking back, I can identify the exact moment everything changed. The Westfield Tower project, a mixed-use development that would become the tallest building in Baltimore, had been my idea originally. I'd identified the property, structured the financing, and nursed the proposal through 3 contentious city council meetings. But when the Baltimore Business Journal ran their feature on the groundbreaking, there was Michael alone on the cover. "The man reshaping Baltimore's skyline," the headline declared. I confronted him that evening, trying to keep disappointment from seeping into my voice. "They made it sound like this was all your vision. like I wasn't even involved. "Kate, don't be dramatic," he'd said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Everyone who matters knows we're a team, but you have to admit, I'm the face of the company. It's just simpler this way." Simpler, that became his favorite word. It was simpler if I handed off my client relationships to the new VP of operations. Simpler if my name was removed from certain corporate filings as we streamlined our business structure. Simpler if he attended Sophia's parent-teacher conferences alone because I was so overwhelmed with everything. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was being systematically sidelined in my own company and my own life. Then came the financial discrepancies. I first noticed them when preparing our tax documents, something Michael had always been happy to leave to me. A new LLC I didn't recognize, property acquisitions not logged in our family portfolio, substantial withdrawals from our equity accounts transferred to business operations that didn't appear in the quarterly reports. Investment vehicles, Michael explained when I asked, his tone suggesting mild impatience with my questions. Tax, strategies the new CFO recommended, nothing for you to worry about. But I did worry, not just because of the money, but because of the dismissal. The suggestion that finances, my area of expertise, the reason he'd been attracted to me in the first place, were now somehow beyond my comprehension or concern. I began my own quiet investigation. Nothing confrontational, nothing that would alert Michael to my suspicions. Just a careful, methodical exploration of what was happening in the business I'd helped build, but now felt increasingly distanced from. What I discovered sent ice through my veins. Wavelength Properties LLC, the mysterious company receiving funds from our accounts, had been established 18 months earlier. Its managing members, Michael Duncan and Vanessa Reed. Its business address? A luxury condo building in Harbor East that I had never visited. Its asset? The newly acquired Emerson building on North Charles Street, purchased with a loan collateralized by Duncan Reed Assets, which was being renovated as the future headquarters of their new venture. The pieces aligned with painful clarity. The sea, late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the increasing distance, the constant texts that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. But the betrayal went beyond the personal. Michael wasn't just having an affair with our company's new marketing director. They were siphoning resources from our company, the company I had helped build, still owned half of on paper, but had been strategically pushed out of operationally. They were preparing to launch a competing business using our assets, our client relationships, our financial foundation. I closed my laptop that night and sat in the dark of my home office for hours. Sophia and Ethan were asleep down the hall, their Christmas wish lists already taped to the refrigerator. My parents had confirmed their annual visit for the holidays. Michael's brother and his family were flying in from Phoenix. Our home would soon be filled with people who believed in the perfect family and successful partnership we projected to the world. I had choices to make. I could confront Michael immediately, setting off a messy public implosion that would hurt our children and potentially damage the company where dozens of loyal employees depended on their paychecks. I could wait until after the holidays, allowing the charade to continue while silently suffering through family celebrations. Or I could do what I had always done best: develop a strategic plan based on the most comprehensive information available. I chose the third option. The following weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. I smiled through charity galas on Michael's arm. I attended Ethan's holiday concert and Sophia's debate tournament. I finalized Christmas menus and ordered gifts. To anyone watching, especially Michael, I was the same devoted wife, mother, and community leader I had always been. But during school hours, I was building the case that would protect what was mine. I consulted with Dorothy Chen, a forensic accountant who had been my roommate at Georgetown. I had discreet coffees with Irene Washington, my former mentor who now headed the commercial lending division at Atlantic Trust Bank. I forwarded key documents to Samuel Abrams, a college friend who had become one of the city's most respected business attorneys. What emerged from these discussions was not just a defensive strategy, but something far more elegant. A countermove so perfectly aligned with my strengths that Dorothy had actually laughed out loud when I outlined it to her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Only you, Kate," she'd said, shaking her head with admiration. "Most people in your position would just file for divorce and take half." "Half isn't enough," I'd replied. "Not when he's trying to take it all." The plan crystallized 3 weeks before Christmas, when Michael casually mentioned over breakfast that he had invited Michelle from HR to join our family celebration. Her family's in London this year, and I couldn't bear the thought of anyone from the Duncan Reed team spending the holidays alone, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "I hope that's okay. I know how you love having a full house at Christmas." I took a slow sip of coffee to compose myself before answering. "Of course. That's very thoughtful of you." That same day, I finalized the last piece of my strategy, a move that had required all my financial expertise, past relationships, and the significant personal assets I had inherited from my grandmother, but kept separate from our marital finances. Michael had never been interested in that inheritance, dismissing it as too conservatively invested and not worth his attention. His lack of attention would prove costly. For the next weeks, I maintained the holiday preparation facade while executing the final details of my plan. I ordered the prime rib Michael preferred for Christmas dinner. I selected perfectly tailored gifts for each family member. I organized the children's schedules so they could spend quality time with their visiting grandparents and uncle. And I prepared one additional gift, the manila envelope I placed in my desk drawer, ready to be set on the dining room sideboard beside the Christmas pudding. As December 25th approached, I found myself filled not with dread, but with a strange, cold clarity. The woman who had gradually been erased from her own company and marriage was reasserting herself. The financial strategist whose insights had built a real estate empire was reclaiming her power. The morning of our family Christmas dinner arrived with picture-perfect snow dusting the trees outside our Roland Park home. Sophia and Ethan bounded downstairs in matching pajamas to discover what Santa had brought. My parents helped with breakfast, while Michael's brother and his wife prepared hot chocolate. Michael moved through these scenes with practiced charm, the devoted father and gracious host. No one remarked on his frequent glances at his watch, or the way he kept checking his phone. I noticed, of course. Each glance told me exactly what I already knew. He was coordinating with Vanessa, timing her arrival for maximum impact but minimum interaction with our extended family. Dinner was scheduled for 6. At 4:30, while everyone was still enjoying their Christmas Day leisure, he announced he needed to pick up a last-minute gift. He returned just before 6, flushed from the cold, eyes bright with anticipation. I was in the kitchen, transferring roasted vegetables to a serving dish, when I heard the doorbell. Sophia answered, her voice carrying clearly through our home. "Dad, there's someone here for you." I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and picked up the platter. By the time I entered the dining room, Michael was already performing introductions. "Mom? Dad? This is Vanessa Reed, our new marketing director at Duncan Reed. Remember I mentioned she'd be joining us?" He turned toward my parents, who nodded politely, then to his brother and sister-in-law. "Her family's celebrating in London this year." Vanessa was younger than I'd expected, early 30s at most, with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore an emerald green dress that complemented her auburn hair, and diamond earrings I recognized immediately as having come from Meritage Jewelers, where Michael and I had an account. "How lovely to meet you all," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of gracious appreciation. I can't thank Michael enough for including me. The office has been absolutely buzzing about the famous Duncan family Christmas. My mother, ever the perfect hostess, quickly assigned her a seat right across from me. Michael looked momentarily disconcerted by this arrangement but recovered quickly, pulling out Vanessa's chair with a flourish that felt more appropriate for a date than a colleague. As everyone settled in, my father said grace, and we began passing dishes around the table. The initial conversation flowed easily enough: holiday pleasantries, compliments on the food, updates on Sophia's debate team victories, and Ethan's progress with his cello. Then Michael's brother asked the question that shifted the evening's trajectory. "So, Vanessa, how long have you been with Duncan Reed?" She glanced quickly at Michael before answering. "Almost 2 years now, though it feels like much longer, doesn't it, Michael? We've become such a seamless team." I watched my mother's eyebrows lift slightly. She had always possessed an uncanny ability to detect undercurrents in social situations. "And what exactly do you do as marketing director?" I asked, my voice pleasant, genuinely curious how she would describe a role that seemed to involve late nights, weekend meetings, and apparently jewelry from my husband. "Oh, everything," she laughed, reaching for her wine glass. "Initially, I was brought in to refresh the company branding, but Michael recognized I had more to offer. Now we're working on some special projects together." "Special projects?" My father leaned forward, interested. "Like what?" Another quick glance between Vanessa and Michael. He jumped in smoothly. "Just some potential expansions we're exploring. Nothing concrete yet." "That reminds me," I said, setting down my fork. "I stopped by the office last week to drop off your Christmas gift. Marjorie mentioned renovations happening at the Emerson building. That's what, 6 blocks from your current headquarters?" I didn't realize we were expanding. The "we" was deliberate, a pointed reminder that despite my recent absence from day-to-day operations, I remained co-owner of the company. Michael's composure slipped, just for a moment. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "It's just an investment property. Market was too good to pass up." "Fascinating," I replied, reaching for the wine bottle. "I don't recall seeing the acquisition paperwork. Must have been overlooked in the quarterly reports." I refilled glasses around the table, ending with Vanessa's. "More wine?" She accepted with a tight smile. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees despite the crackling fire in the adjacent living room. Sophia, 13 and preternaturally perceptive, glanced between us with narrowed eyes. "Mom, didn't you tell me you used to handle all the property acquisitions?" "I did, sweetheart, for many years." I smiled at my daughter, impressed by her awareness and timing. "Kate has been focused on the foundation work," Michael interjected quickly, "making sure Duncan Reed gives back to the community. She's absolutely brilliant at it. The affordable housing initiative has been getting national attention." His attempt to redirect the conversation might have worked had Vanessa not chosen that moment to add her own commentary. "The foundation is such a passion project," she said, her tone suggesting something small and inconsequential. "Michael often says how grateful he is that it keeps you fulfilled while he handles the core business." The silence that followed was profound. Even Ethan, at 11 still typically oblivious to adult tensions, stopped eating to look up. My mother set down her knife and fork with deliberate care. "Is that so?" She looked directly at Michael, her expression neutral, but her tone arctic. "How interesting that my daughter's work providing affordable housing for essential workers is considered a passion project, while your marketing initiatives are core business." Michael flushed. "That's not what Vanessa misunderstood. Kate's contributions to Duncan Reed have always been fundamental. The foundation is just one aspect." "Actually," I interrupted, my voice calm, "Vanessa didn't misunderstand at all. That's exactly how you've been framing my role for the past 2 years, gradually minimizing my involvement, removing me from meetings, rerouting documents that should have crossed my desk. It's been quite systematic. I turned to Vanessa, whose expression had frozen somewhere between confusion and alarm. Tell me, did he describe me as a silent partner? A figurehead? Or did he simply fail to mention that I co-founded the company and still own 50% of it? The color drained from her face. I don't think this is an appropriate dinner conversation. On the contrary, I replied, Christmas dinner with family seems exactly the right time to discuss family business, especially when that business involves embezzlement, corporate fraud, and plans to establish a competing firm using resources from the original company. Michael's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly. Kate, that's enough. You're making wild accusations based on misunderstandings. Let's talk about this later privately. Later and privately was an option 3 weeks ago when I first discovered Wavelength Properties LLC, I said, remaining seated. It was an option when I found the banking transfers, the hidden acquisition documents, the duplicate client files. But you chose to bring your deception and your accomplice into our home on Christmas, in front of our children and our parents. Vanessa stood now too, grabbing her purse. I should go. This is clearly... Sit down, I told her, my tone leaving no room for argument. You came for Christmas dinner. We haven't even reached dessert yet. Remarkably, she hesitated, then slowly sank back into her chair. Michael remained standing, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Kate, you're embarrassing yourself and upsetting the children. Whatever you think you've found, you're misinterpreting. I would never... Do the words collateralized loan mean anything to you? I asked, cutting him off. How about fiduciary? Responsibility? Corporate governance? Securities fraud? His face went ashen. This isn't the time or place. Your sister-in-law is a federal prosecutor, I reminded him, nodding toward Michael's brother's wife, who was watching the unfolding scene with professional interest. Perhaps she can explain the legal implications of using one company's assets as collateral for a loan to establish a competing business. I found that particularly creative. My father cleared his throat. I think the children should be excused. Always the diplomat, he smiled at Sophia and Ethan. Why don't you two get started on the dessert setup in the kitchen? Your grandmother and I will help. The children, wide-eyed but obedient, pushed back their chairs. My mother squeezed my shoulder as she passed, a silent gesture of support. Michael's brother and sister-in-law exchanged glances but remained seated, clearly unwilling to miss what was coming next. Once the children had left, I reached for the manila envelope I'd placed on the sideboard earlier. Michael, you've been telling me for 2 years that my financial expertise was no longer needed at Duncan Reed, that my focus on details was slowing down progress, that I needed to trust your vision without questioning the mechanics. I slid the envelope across the table. As it happens, that attention to detail and my separate assets, which you always dismissed as too modest to bother with, have proven quite valuable. He didn't reach for the envelope. What is this? The reason you'll be paying me rent for the next 20 years. I nodded at the documents. Go ahead, open it. With visible reluctance, he pulled out the contents. Property deed, loan documents, and a letter on Atlantic Trust Bank letterhead. 3 weeks ago, I explained for everyone at the table, I learned that Michael and Vanessa had established a new company and purchased the Emerson building to serve as its headquarters. The purchase was financed with a loan using Duncan Reed assets as collateral. Assets I still co-own, though the loan paperwork conveniently omitted that fact. Vanessa was staring at Michael now, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. You told me everything was handled, she said quietly. That Kate had signed off on the asset allocation. I never signed anything, I clarified. My signature was either forged or, more likely, simply deemed unnecessary since Michael has been representing himself as the sole decision-maker for some time now. Michael was frantically flipping through the documents, his breathing shallow. This isn't possible. The loan was approved. The building purchase closed last month. Yes, it did, I agreed. And 3 days ago, Atlantic Trust Bank sold that loan to Harborview Investments. He looked up sharply. Harborview? I've never heard of them. That's not surprising. Harborview was established 14 months ago using my inheritance as seed capital. Irene Washington, remember her from business school? Helped me set it up as part of my personal investment strategy. The strategy you called too conservative and not worth discussing. Understanding began to dawn on his face. You're Harborview, he said flatly. I'm the primary stakeholder, yes. And now, Harborview owns the mortgage on the building that you and Vanessa plan to use for your new venture. Which means I own the mortgage. More specifically, I control the terms, the interest rate, and the consequences of any default. Michael's brother let out a low whistle. Nicely played, Kate. Michael slammed the documents down. This is manipulation. Corporate sabotage. I'll contest it. On what grounds? I asked mildly. That you didn't realize your wife, who you've been systematically pushing out of the company she co-founded while simultaneously planning to leave her, might actually understand corporate finance better than you anticipated? That's not a legal defense, Michael, it's just embarrassing. Vanessa stood again, this time with finality. I was told this was all above board, that Kate had stepped back voluntarily to focus on charitable work, that the asset allocation had been approved by the board. She grabbed her coat from the back of her chair. I won't be part of anything fraudulent. My reputation in this industry means everything. You might want to consult an attorney, my sister-in-law suggested, speaking for the first time. From what I'm hearing, there could be significant liability issues for you as well. Vanessa, wait, Michael called, but she was already striding toward the front door. You lied to me, she said over her shoulder. About everything, apparently. The front door opened and closed. In the sudden silence, we could hear my parents and the children in the kitchen, the cheerful clatter of dessert plates providing an incongruous soundtrack to the scene in the dining room. You've ruined everything, Michael said, his voice low, and dangerous. Correction, I replied evenly. I've protected what's mine. There's a difference. His brother stood, placing a restraining hand on Michael's arm when he took a step toward me. Think very carefully about your next move, he advised quietly. From where I'm standing, Kate's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of people you don't want to antagonize further. Michael shrugged off his brother's hand but remained where he was, visibly calculating his options. I could almost see the scenarios running through his mind. Legal challenges, counter-maneuvers, damage control. You have choices, I told him, my voice softening slightly. They're just different from the ones you anticipated having today. We can work out a reasonable separation, both personal and professional. You can continue at Duncan Reed under a revised operating agreement, or you can pursue your new venture as my tenant. But the days of sidelining me, gaslighting me about my value and using our joint assets without my knowledge, those are over. And if I fight this, then, in addition to a divorce filing first thing tomorrow, there will be a corporate audit, fraud charges, and a very public explanation to our clients about why their investments have been put at risk. Your call. My sister-in-law, ever practical, interjected, The children are waiting to serve dessert. Shall we table the business discussion and try to salvage some semblance of a family Christmas? Michael looked at her incredulously. Salvage? Christmas? After this ambush? It was your choice to bring your affair into our home, I pointed out. To introduce her to our children, to my parents. The ambush was yours. I simply came prepared for it. His brother steered him firmly toward the kitchen. Let's get some coffee and dessert. Everyone will calm down and we can discuss next steps rationally. As they left, I remained at the table alone for a moment, running my fingers over the Polished wood that had hosted 15 years of family dinners, holiday celebrations, homework sessions, and late-night conversations. So many memories embedded in this house, this marriage, this life we had built. The sadness I had expected to feel was present, but muted, overshadowed by something else. A sense of reclaimed power, of renewed possibility. When I finally joined, everyone in the kitchen, Sophia was serving slices of chocolate Yule log, her movements careful and precise. Ethan was arranging mint leaves as garnish, his artistic eye evident even in this small task. My mother squeezed my hand when I stood beside her. My father nodded approvingly. Michael sat stiffly at the kitchen island, mechanically accepting the dessert placed before him. He didn't meet my eyes, but I could see him watching me peripherally, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman he had married, the partner he had underestimated. "This looks beautiful," I told my children, accepting my own portion with genuine appreciation. The perfect end to a memorable Christmas. Sophia glanced between Michael and me, her emotional intelligence far exceeding her 13 years. "Is everything okay?" I considered my answer carefully, aware that this moment would become part of her understanding of relationships, of self-worth, of standing up for oneself. "Not everything," I admitted, "but the important things are. And the difficult things will get better with time." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this honest but measured response. As we ate dessert in strained but civil silence, I thought about the coming days, the legal meetings, the corporate restructuring, the inevitable conversations with the children about our changing family. None of it would be easy, but all of it would be navigated with the same strategic thinking, the same attention to detail, the same fundamental strength that had brought me to this moment. Michael had spent years convincing himself, perhaps even believing, that my greatest contributions were behind us, that my role could be diminished without consequence. He had forgotten, or never truly understood, that the same qualities that had built our company were not attributes I could simply set aside: precision, foresight, determination, the ability to see 3 moves ahead while others focused on immediate gain. As I watched him pick at his dessert, his expression caught between anger and calculation, I felt a surprising flicker of gratitude. His betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to reclaim parts of myself I had allowed to be diminished, had compelled me to trust my instincts when they alerted me to discrepancies, had pushed me to reactivate professional relationships and skills that had been dormant but never lost. The manila envelope with its damning contents had been my checkmate move, but the game had been won long before this Christmas dinner. It had been won the moment I decided I was worth fighting for: my company, my financial security, my self-respect. The moment I recognized that what Michael had dismissed as my weaknesses, attention to detail, caution, methodical analysis, were actually my greatest strengths. Ethan looked up suddenly from his dessert. "Will Vanessa be coming back?" She left. Her scarf. "No, honey," I told him, meeting Michael's gaze across the kitchen. "I don't think she'll be coming back." The rest of the evening unfolded with the strained politeness of people determined to maintain appearances for the sake of the children. Michael's brother and sister-in-law left shortly after dessert, promising to call the next day. My parents retired to the guest room, my father kissing my forehead like he had when I was a child facing disappointment, my mother whispering, "I'm so proud of you." The children, sensing the undercurrents but not fully comprehending them, disappeared into their rooms with their new Christmas gifts, leaving Michael and me alone in the living room with the dying embers of the fire. "Was any of it real?" he asked finally, staring into the fading glow. "Us, I mean. Or was it always just a business arrangement to you?" The question was so breathtakingly hypocritical that I almost laughed. Instead, I considered it honestly, as a farewell gift to the man I had once loved completely. "It was real," I told him. When we built the company together, when we celebrated each success as a team, when the children were born, all of that was real. The partnership was real until you decided I was no longer a necessary part of it. He nodded slowly, still, not looking at me. What happens tomorrow? Legally? My attorneys will contact yours. Practically? I'll be returning to my office at Duncan Reed, the one you converted to a conference room last spring. And personally, I'll be helping our children understand that families can change shape without breaking. And the Emerson Building is an excellent investment property with one ready-made tenant, assuming Wavelength Properties still wants the space. The terms will be fair but firm. Just business, as you've been so fond of saying recently. He finally turned to face me, his expression a complicated mixture of anger, respect, and something like regret. You could have confronted me weeks ago when you first discovered everything. Why wait? Why let it unfold like this, in front of everyone? I considered the question, wanting to be honest with myself as much as with him. Because you needed to understand exactly what you were losing. Not just your wife, but a partner who sees the whole board when you're only looking at the next move. Someone who builds safeguards while you're pursuing quick gains. Who maintains relationships you dismiss as unimportant until they become leverage in negotiations you never anticipated. I stood, suddenly weary of the conversation, of the day, of the weeks of strategic planning and emotional compartmentalization. You brought your girlfriend to our family Christmas, I said simply. I brought the papers showing I owned your office building. One of us understood the game we were actually playing. As I climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, which would soon be mine alone, I felt a weight lifting. Not the lightness of freedom exactly, but the unburdening that comes with reclaiming your own narrative. With remembering who you are when you strip away the compromises, the accommodations, the gradual erosions of self that can happen in any relationship if you're not vigilant. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of a Christmas that had transformed everything, I recognized that Michael had unknowingly given me a final gift. The opportunity to rediscover the woman I had always been beneath the roles of wife, mother, and gradually sidelined business partner. The strategist, the builder, the force to be reckoned with. I closed my bedroom door softly behind me, leaving the past on the other side. The January snow fell, in thick, silent flakes, outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of what had once been Michael's corner office. Now, 3 weeks after that transformative Christmas dinner, the space had been reclaimed and reimagined. Gone was the imposing mahogany desk that had served as a barrier between Michael and anyone who entered. In its place stood a round conference table of polished walnut, positioned to encourage collaboration rather than hierarchy. The leather sofa remained, but now accompanied by 2 armchairs in a rich blue that brightened the otherwise neutral palette. Harold Chen, our chief financial officer, sat across from me, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and relief as we reviewed the preliminary audit findings. I should have flagged these discrepancies months ago, he admitted, tapping the spreadsheet before us. The pattern is obvious now. Patterns are always clearer in retrospect, I said, not unkindly. Harold had been caught in an impossible situation, hired by Michael, aware something wasn't right, but uncertain of his standing if he raised concerns to a partner who seemed increasingly removed from daily operations. The good news, he continued, is that most of the diverted funds can be traced and recovered. The client accounts weren't compromised. Michael was smarter than that. He used operating capital and the equity line secured by existing properties. I nodded, making a note in my leather-bound planner. And the Westfield Tower project? On schedule and within budget. Harold's relief was palpable. The flagship development that would reshape Baltimore's skyline had been my most immediate concern when I returned to active management of Duncan Reed. Any delays or funding issues there would have rippled through our entire portfolio. A knock at the door interrupted us. Leslie, my newly hired assistant, entered with a sleek folder. "The revised operating agreement from legal," she announced, placing it before me. "And Mr. Abrams called to confirm your 4 o'clock." "Thank you, Leslie." I glanced at my watch. "Let's reconvene tomorrow morning, Harold. I'd like to review the forensic accounting report before we make decisions about the recovery strategy." After he left, I opened the folder and scanned the document that would formalize the new leadership structure at Duncan Reed Properties. The changes were substantial but fair. I would assume the role of CEO, while Michael could remain as a managing partner with specific limited authorities. His ownership share would be reduced from 50% to 30%, reflecting the financial impact of his actions and the capital I had injected to stabilize operations. Whether he would accept these terms remained to be seen. Our communication since Christmas had been conducted entirely through attorneys, a sterile exchange of proposals and counter-proposals, accusations and defenses. The children shuttled between our home and the luxury hotel where he had taken residence, their faces carefully neutral when they returned from time with their father. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Debate team advanced to regionals. Can we celebrate tonight?" I smiled, typing back, "Absolutely. You pick the restaurant. Invite Dad if you'd like." Her response came quickly. "Just us this time. Maybe Ethan too, if he promises not to be weird." The easy shorthand between us warmed me, a reminder that amid all the corporate and legal maneuvering, these two remarkable humans were what mattered most. Their resilience in the face of family upheaval had surprised and humbled me. Ethan had responded with quiet stoicism, channeling his emotions into his cello playing, which had taken on a new intensity. Sophia, ever the analyst, had asked pointed, practical questions about the separation, nodding thoughtfully at my careful answers. "Are you getting divorced because Dad had a girlfriend, or because he tried to take the company?" she had asked one evening, her homework spread across the kitchen island as I prepared dinner. "Both," I had answered honestly, "but mostly because trust was broken in ways that can't be repaired." She had considered this, tapping her pencil against her textbook. "That makes sense. Rebuilding a company is easier than rebuilding trust." Out of the mouths of babes, I had thought, marveling at her insight. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflections. "Ms. Duncan, Samuel Abrams is here for your 4 o'clock. Send him in, please." I closed the operating agreement folder and stood to greet my attorney and longtime friend. Sam entered with the confident stride that had intimidated opposing counsel for over 2 decades. His gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than one of the city's most feared business litigators. "Kate," he said warmly, embracing me briefly before taking a seat. "The office looks good. Very much your style now." "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're fueled by righteous indignation," I replied with a smile, returning to my chair. "What's the latest?" Sam's expression grew more serious as he removed documents from his briefcase. "There's been a development with the Emerson building situation. Michael's finally ready to negotiate reasonable terms for Wavelength?" "Not exactly." Sam adjusted his glasses. "Wavelength Properties has filed for dissolution. Vanessa Reed has withdrawn completely and is reportedly taking a position with a firm in Chicago." I raised an eyebrow. "Abandoning ship entirely? Interesting." "It gets better. Michael has a new proposal regarding the building." He slid a document across the table. "He wants to buy out your interest in the mortgage." I skimmed the offer, noting the figure, slightly above market value, but not excessively so. "Using what funds?" "We've frozen most of his accessible assets pending the full accounting." Sam's smile held a hint of admiration. "That's where it gets interesting. He's secured backing from Edward Harrington." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of surprise through me. Edward Harrington was one of Baltimore's most established real estate developers, a contemporary of my father's generation with a reputation for aggressive acquisition strategies and political connections that bordered on problematic. Harrington hasn't taken on a partner in 20 years, I said slowly, trying to process this unexpected alliance. He and Michael have completely different approaches to development. Harrington builds, sells, and moves on. Our model. I caught. Myself, Michael's model has always been about long-term holdings and community integration. People redefine themselves in crisis, Sam observed. Michael may be embracing a different philosophy now that he's faced with limited options. I tapped my fingers against the document, thinking through the implications. What's your read on this? Strategic move or desperate flailing? Both, possibly. Sam leaned back in his chair. From a legal perspective, accepting this offer would cleanly sever one of the more complicated entanglements between you. From a business perspective. He trailed off, leaving the assessment to me. I stood and moved to the window, watching the snow transform the city below. Edward Harrington's involvement changed the calculation significantly. With his backing, Michael could potentially establish a legitimate competing firm, one with enough capital and connections to directly challenge Duncan Reed on certain types of projects. What does Michael truly want? I mused aloud. The building? Freedom from my oversight? Legitimacy for whatever he's planning next? All of the above, I'd wager, Sam replied. Plus the opportunity to save face. Being your tenant hardly aligns with the image he's cultivated. I turned back to face my attorney. Have you received the revised divorce proposal from his counsel? Sam nodded, retrieving another document. Came in this morning. It's marginally more reasonable than his initial position, but still problematic in several key areas. I reviewed the terms, noting with grim amusement that Michael was still attempting to claim credit for the growth of my inheritance-based investments, despite having dismissed them as inconsequential for years. He's overplaying his hand, I concluded, returning to my seat. But there may be room for a global settlement that addresses both the personal and business aspects. You're considering a comprehensive resolution? Sam looked intrigued. That's a departure from your position last week. I smiled slightly. Let's just say I'm evaluating the board from a different angle now. Draft a counterproposal with these parameters. I outlined my conditions, watching Sam make notes. When I finished, he looked up with raised eyebrows. Bold move. Michael won't like these terms. Michael forfeited his right to like or dislike my terms when he diverted company assets to fund his exit strategy. I closed the folder containing his proposals. But this approach gives him a clear path forward, separate from Duncan Reed, while protecting my interests and the company's stability. Sam nodded slowly. I'll have this drafted by tomorrow morning. Are you sure about the Aston Street project clause? Absolutely. It's non-negotiable. The Aston Street development was a mixed-income housing initiative that had been my passion project for years. Michael had repeatedly delayed it, citing market timing concerns, but I suspected his real objection was the lower profit margin compared to our luxury developments. After Sam departed, I remained at my desk, gazing out at the snow-covered city as twilight descended. The landscape of my life had shifted so dramatically in recent weeks that moments of quiet reflection had become essential to maintaining my equilibrium. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Michael. We need to talk directly, not through attorneys. Dinner tomorrow? The invitation was unexpected. Since Christmas, he had vacillated between cold fury and tactical maneuvering, sending demanding letters through his counsel while avoiding direct communication. I considered ignoring the message or deflecting with a reference to our legal teams. Instead, I typed, Harrington's backing changes the equation. Lunch at Tersiguel's, 1 p.m. Private room. His response came quickly. I'll be there. I set down the phone and turned my chair to face the city vista completely. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the sharp edges of buildings, transforming the urban landscape into something softer, more forgiving. Tomorrow would bring another round of negotiations, another careful recalibration of boundaries and expectations. But tonight belonged to Sophia's celebration, to Ethan's cello practice, to the quiet restoration of our family's new shape. My intercom buzzed one final time. "Ms. Duncan, your car is here." "Thank you, Leslie. I'll be right down." I gathered my coat and bag, closed my computer, and took one last look around the office that now truly reflected my vision. 3 weeks ago, I had been fighting to be seen, to be acknowledged as an equal partner in the company I had helped build. Now I was leading it into its next chapter on my own terms. The revelation at Christmas dinner had been necessary but painful, a controlled demolition of a structure that could no longer stand. What rose from those ruins would be stronger, more authentic, and entirely mine to define. As I stepped onto the elevator, I felt a sudden, unexpected lightness. Not the absence of challenges, those remained substantial, but the presence of something I had gradually lost during the later years of my marriage, the absolute certainty that I was equal to whatever came next. The restaurant Sophia had chosen was a casual Italian place near our home, known for its handmade pasta and relaxed atmosphere. When I arrived, both children were already seated at a corner table, Ethan fidgeting with the bread basket while Sophia organized what appeared to be note cards. "Mom," she called, waving me over. "I'm practicing my acceptance speech for when we win regionals." "A bit premature," I observed, kissing the top of her head before sliding into the booth beside Ethan, who leaned briefly against my shoulder in his version of a greeting. "Strategic visualization," she corrected primly. "Ms. Winters says champions see themselves winning before they ever step onto the stage." "Can't argue with that approach," I agreed, picking up a menu. "So tell me about the competition, which argument clinched it?" As Sophia launched into a detailed recounting of the debate team's victory, punctuated by Ethan's occasional deadpan commentary, I felt the day's tensions begin to dissolve. These two extraordinary humans with their quick minds and resilient hearts, this was the success that mattered most. Whatever happened with Michael, with Duncan Reed, with the carefully reconstructed professional identity I was building, nothing would overshadow the fierce pride I felt watching my children navigate this difficult transition with such grace. Later that evening, after the children had disappeared into their rooms with mumbled goodnights that passed for effusive displays of affection from teenagers, I sat in my home office reviewing Sam's preliminary notes on the counteroffer. The terms I had outlined were generous in some respects, unyielding in others, a reflection of my desire for a clean break balanced against the practical recognition that Michael and I would remain connected through our children, if not through business. My phone rang, the screen displaying Dorothy Chen with her distinctive photo, Dorothy at the summit of Kilimanjaro, her triumphant grin visible despite the snow goggles and heavy weather gear. "Perfect timing," I answered. "I was just about to call you." "Great minds," she replied, her voice carrying the slight echo of a speakerphone in a car. "I'm heading home from a client meeting and wanted to update you. The forensic team has completed the analysis of all transactions from the past 3 years." I reached for a notepad. "What's the damage?" "Less catastrophic than we initially feared. The total diversion amounts to approximately $2.4 million, substantial, but not enough to threaten the company's stability. More importantly, we've verified that client funds remained untouched. Michael may have been planning his exit, but he was careful not to cross certain lines." This aligned with my understanding of my husband's character, ethical flexibility rather than outright criminality. He had convinced himself that his actions were justified, perhaps even fair, given what he perceived as his outsized contribution to the company's success. "What about the Westfield financing?" I asked, concerned about our flagship project. "Rock solid. Michael was too smart to mess with the capital structure of your most visible project." The diverted funds came primarily from operational accounts and the equity line secured by mature properties. Any surprises I should know about before meeting with him tomorrow? There was a slight pause. Just one. There's a pattern of transfers to a separate account we hadn't identified previously. Smaller amounts, but consistent. About $15,000. Monthly for the past year. The account holder is listed as V. Reed Consulting. Vanessa. Not content with the romance and the promise of partnership in the new venture, she had been collecting a side payment as well. I wondered if Michael had offered it, or if she had demanded it. Insurance, perhaps, against exactly the kind of collapse that had ultimately occurred. Interesting, I said, making a note. Forward the complete report when it's available. You'll have it first thing tomorrow. And Kate? Dorothy's voice softened slightly. He's not winning this one. The numbers don't lie, and they tell a story that no judge or arbitrator could possibly misinterpret. After we disconnected, I sat in the quiet of my home office, reflecting on Dorothy's parting comment. The numbers didn't lie. That had always been my mantra, my North Star in both business and personal matters. Spreadsheets couldn't be charmed, or manipulated the way people could. Financial records revealed truths that carefully crafted narratives might obscure. And the truth they revealed in this case was unequivocal. Michael had been systematically preparing to leave both his marriage and the company he had helped build, using resources that weren't solely his to deploy. Yet even with this clarity, tomorrow's meeting carried emotional complications that no spreadsheet could capture. This would be our first face-to-face conversation since Christmas, the first opportunity to gauge whether the man I had loved for 15 years felt any genuine remorse beyond the practical consequences of his actions. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered garden behind our home. The landscape architecture had been a joint project in the early years of our marriage, Michael suggesting the overall concept, me refining the details and selecting the specific plantings. Like so much of what we had built together, it represented a genuine collaboration, each of us contributing complementary strengths to create something neither could have achieved alone. Now, blanketed in snow, the garden's structure was still visible. The stone pathways, the pergola, the careful arrangement of trees, but softened, transformed by the weather into something both familiar and changed. A fitting metaphor for this transitional moment in my life. My phone buzzed with a final text for the evening, this one from Irene Washington, my mentor and the banking executive who had helped me establish Harborview Investments. Heard rumors about Harrington backing Michael's new venture. Let's talk before your meeting tomorrow. Breakfast at the Four Seasons, 7:30? I texted back my confirmation, grateful once again for the professional network I had maintained even during the years when my role at Duncan Reed had been gradually diminished. Those relationships, dismissed by Michael as coffee dates and social connections, had proven to be among my most valuable assets as I navigated this unexpected chapter. Morning arrived with clearing skies and a fresh perspective. Over Eggs Benedict at the Four Seasons, Irene provided insights about Edward Harrington that would prove invaluable in my upcoming negotiation with Michael. Harrington's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, she explained, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. His last 3 projects have faced significant community opposition and regulatory hurdles. His usual tactics, political pressure, and financial incentives aren't working as effectively in the current climate. And he thinks Michael can help with that? I asked, skeptical. While my husband excelled at client relationships, community engagement had always been my domain at Duncan Reed. Irene shrugged elegantly. He thinks the Duncan Reed reputation for community integration and sustainable development might rub off on his projects if Michael's involved. What he doesn't realize is that you were the architect of that reputation. So Harrington's backing comes with expectations Michael may struggle to fulfill. Precisely. and Harrington isn't known for his patience with partners who underdeliver. Irene set down her coffee cup with a decisive clink. This alliance gives Michael an exit strategy, but it also places him under significant pressure to produce results he may not be equipped to deliver without you. This insight reshaped my thinking about the negotiation ahead. Michael wasn't operating from a position of strength, despite securing Harrington's backing. If anything, he had traded one form of accountability, to me and our joint company, for another potentially more demanding one. As I drove to Tersigels for our 1 o'clock meeting, I considered how to use this understanding to craft an agreement that would benefit all parties. Me, Michael, Duncan Reed, and most importantly, our children. The restaurant's private dining room offered a welcome discretion, its soft lighting and elegant French country decor creating an atmosphere both neutral and civilized. I arrived 15 minutes early, requesting still water and reviewing my notes one final time before Michael's arrival. He entered exactly on time, dressed impeccably as always in a charcoal suit that emphasized his athletic build and the silver at his temples. For a disorienting moment, I saw him as a stranger might, handsome, successful, confident, before the more complex reality reasserted itself. "Kate," he said, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet directly." "Professional." "Courtesy," I replied, closing my portfolio. "And efficiency. Some matters are better discussed without intermediaries." He nodded, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the room, the table settings, finally settling his gaze on me. "You look well." "I am well," I confirmed, neither coldly nor warmly. Focused, busy, moving forward. A shadow crossed his face at this last phrase, but he recovered quickly. "The children mentioned you've been restructuring the executive team at Duncan Reed." "Streamlining operations," I said, deliberately echoing his favorite explanation for the changes he had implemented to sideline me. "Harold Chen has been extremely helpful in identifying areas for improvement." Michael's jaw tightened slightly. Harold always was thorough. Indeed, his forensic accounting report makes for fascinating reading. I let that hang between us for a moment before continuing. "But I suspect you didn't request this meeting to discuss corporate structure. Shall we address the Harrington situation directly?" Any hope he might have harbored that I was unaware of his new backer disappeared. He leaned back slightly, reassessing. "You're well informed, as always." Irene Washington sits on the loan committee at Atlantic Trust. Edward Harrington's financing inquiries don't go unnoticed. Michael nodded, accepting this reality. "Then you know I have a viable path forward, independent of Duncan Reed and," he hesitated, "our other entanglements. I know you've secured backing from a developer with a reputation for aggressive tactics and limited community engagement. Quite a departure from the values you've espoused for 15 years. I kept my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "But yes, it does provide you with options that weren't available 3 weeks ago." He studied me for a moment. "You don't seem concerned." "Should I be?" I raised an eyebrow. Harrington operates in a different market segment than Duncan Reed. His projects are short-term, high turnover, and primarily luxury-focused. Our portfolio is built on long-term holdings, mixed-use developments, and community integration. "Our portfolio," he repeated quietly. "You've fully reclaimed the company, I see." "I never relinquished it," I corrected him. "You just convinced yourself that I had." The server arrived with water and menus, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. After ordering, Michael returned to the subject at hand. "I want to buy out your interest in the Emerson building," he said directly. "Harrington's backing makes that possible. The offer Sam received is fair, above market value in fact." "It is," I agreed. "And if that were the only matter between us, I might consider it independently. But as you know, We're dealing with a complex web of interrelated issues. The division of marital assets, your reduced role at Duncan Reed, the children's future security, all of which our attorneys are addressing separately. I smiled slightly. Are they? Because from my perspective, it makes more sense to negotiate. A comprehensive settlement that resolves all outstanding issues simultaneously. Cleaner, more efficient, and potentially more advantageous for everyone involved. His expression sharpened with interest. You have a counter-proposal. I do. I opened my portfolio and removed the document Sam had couriered over that morning. A global settlement, addressing both personal and professional matters. The key points are straightforward. I slid the document across the table, watching as Michael scanned the terms with the focus that had made him an effective negotiator throughout his career. His expression remained carefully controlled, but I caught the slight widening of his eyes at certain provisions, the momentary tightening of his jaw at others. When he looked up, his assessment was measured. Some of these terms are unexpected, but not unreasonable, I countered. You receive a clean break from Duncan Reed with a reduced but still substantial ownership interest. I retain operational control and the freedom to pursue projects like Aston Street without further obstruction. The Emerson building transitions to you at a fair price, structured as part of the overall settlement to minimize tax implications. And the non-compete clause? He asked, tapping that section of the document. Is limited in scope and duration. You're free to develop projects with Harrington or anyone else, provided they don't directly target Duncan Reed's existing client relationships or active development zones for a period of 3 years. He nodded slowly, returning to the document for a more careful reading. Our meals arrived, and we ate in relative silence as he continued to review the terms. The children's trust provisions are generous, he noted eventually, setting down his fork. They're not bargaining chips, I said simply. Their security is non-negotiable. For the first time since he entered the room, Michael's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. I would never use them as leverage, Kate. Whatever. You think of me now. I love Sophia and Ethan. I know you do. I softened my tone marginally, which is why I've structured the visitation and co-parenting arrangements with maximum flexibility. Your relationship with them shouldn't be constrained by rigid schedules or legal formalities. He studied me with a new intensity, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he had gradually sidelined, the partner whose contributions he had systematically minimized. This is very clean, he said finally. Rational, pragmatic. Did you expect something different? Punitive measures? Emotional demands? Honestly, yes. He set the document aside. After Christmas, I anticipated you would use every available lever to extract maximum concessions, to punish me. This is unexpectedly balanced. I considered my response carefully, wanting neither to absolve him nor to escalate hostilities that would ultimately harm our children and the company we had built. Punishment isn't my objective, Michael. Clean resolution is. You made choices that fundamentally altered our marriage and our business partnership. I've made choices to protect what matters most to me. Now we both need a clear path forward that minimizes further damage. He nodded slowly, a new respect visible in his expression. I'll need to review this with my attorneys, of course. Of course, I expect a response within 48 hours. As the server cleared our plates, an unexpected question formed in my mind, one that had lingered beneath the surface of all my strategic planning and practical arrangements. Why her? I asked quietly, surprising myself with the personal direction. Why Vanessa? Michael looked startled by the shift, then contemplative. She reminded me of you, he admitted after a moment. The you I met at Georgetown, ambitious, sharp, unwavering in her convictions. Before marriage and children and the foundation work. He trailed off, perhaps realizing how his words might sound. "Before I became inconvenient to your narrative," I finished for him. "That's not," he began, then stopped himself. "Perhaps it was something like that," he acknowledged with unexpected honesty. "You built the systems that made Duncan Reed successful, created the operational framework that allowed our growth. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that the visible aspects, client relationships, public recognition, the deal closings, were the only parts that mattered." It was the closest he had come to genuine insight about what had gone wrong between us, professionally, if not personally. "Well," I said, gathering my things as the server returned with the check, "now you'll have the opportunity to discover how well those visible aspects function without the systems supporting them." He reached for the check, a reflexive gesture. I imagine Edward Harrington will have similar expectations about tangible results versus behind-the-scenes foundation building. "No doubt." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "I'll anticipate your response to the settlement proposal by Friday. If the terms are acceptable, we can move forward with the necessary paperwork immediately." Michael rose as well, his height still imposing despite all that had changed between us. "And if I have counter-proposals? Then our attorneys will earn their considerable fees negotiating adjustments." I extended my hand, a deliberate shift to professional formality. "But I believe you'll find the current terms represent the most advantageous resolution possible under the circumstances." He hesitated, then took my offered hand. The familiar warmth of his palm against mine triggered a momentary cascade of memories, 15 years compressed into a single touch. Then I withdrew, reclaiming my boundaries along with my hand. "Goodbye, Michael. Give my best to Edward Harrington. I suspect you'll find him an illuminating partner." As I walked through the main dining room toward the exit, I felt Michael's gaze following me, evaluating this new version of his wife. The CEO rather than the supportive partner, the strategist rather than the implementer, the woman who had brought papers showing she owned his office building to their family Christmas dinner. Outside, the January sun had emerged, transforming the morning snow into a brilliant landscape of light and shadow. I paused on the sidewalk, turning my face toward the warmth, allowing myself a moment to appreciate both the beauty of the day and the clarity I had achieved. The path forward remained complex, with negotiations and transitions still to navigate. But the fundamental shift had already occurred. In my professional standing, in my personal agency, and most importantly, in my own understanding of my worth. Michael had brought his girlfriend to our family Christmas, believing it was his moment, to rewrite our story on his terms. Instead, it had become the catalyst for me to reclaim the narrative entirely, to transform a painful betrayal into an opportunity for renewed purpose and unexpected strength. As I walked to my car, I smiled at the memory of Sophia's assessment weeks earlier. Rebuilding a company is easier than rebuilding trust. My daughter, in her 13-year-old wisdom, had captured the essential truth. The company could be restructured, the assets reallocated, the operational systems redesigned. Trust, once shattered, required something different. Not repair, but release. Not reconstruction, but reinvention. In letting go of the need to understand or forgive Michael's betrayal, I had freed myself to focus instead on building something new, something entirely my own. The papers showing I owned his office building had been just the beginning. What I was creating now, at Duncan Reed, with my children, in my own life, would be the lasting legacy of that pivotal Christmas night. 5 months after that fateful Christmas dinner, spring had fully embraced Baltimore. Cherry blossoms adorned the streets, and a warm breeze carried the scent of new beginnings through the open windows of my office. Duncan Reed Properties had not merely survived the transition, it was thriving under my leadership, with 2 major projects breaking ground and a feature in Architectural Digest highlighting our community-centered approach to urban development. The Aston Street project, my passion that Michael had repeatedly sidelined, was finally becoming reality. Just yesterday, we'd held the groundbreaking ceremony for the mixed-income housing development designed to provide affordable options for healthcare workers from the nearby medical center. The mayor had attended, praising Duncan Reed's vision for inclusive urban growth, while local news cameras captured the moment for the evening broadcasts. "The renderings are finished for the community space," Harold announced, entering my office, with a tablet. Our CFO had flourished in the reorganized company structure, his financial acumen now paired with the confidence to voice his insights directly. The architects incorporated all the feedback from the neighborhood association. I scrolled through the images, noting the thoughtful integration of green space, a children's play area, and flexible gathering zones that could accommodate everything from farmers markets to community arts events. "It's perfect," I said, genuinely pleased. "Schedule the presentation for next week's neighborhood meeting. I want to be there personally." Harold nodded, making a note before addressing the other reason for his visit. "The quarterly financials are ready for review. We've exceeded projections in all divisions." His satisfaction was well earned. We'd spent the first quarter conducting a comprehensive restructuring of Duncan Reed's operations, streamlining decision-making processes and reallocating resources to maximize efficiency. The strategy was bearing fruit faster than even I had anticipated. "Send them over, and let's schedule a full team review for Monday morning." I paused, then added, "And Harold, include a special recognition bonus for the project management team. Their work on the Westfield Tower timeline adjustment saved us considerably." After he left, I turned my chair toward the windows, taking in the panoramic view of the harbor. The water sparkled in the May sunshine, dotted with sailboats taking advantage of the perfect weather. From this vantage point on the 28th floor, the city appeared as a harmonious blend of historic architecture and modern innovation, much like Duncan Reed itself had become under my refreshed leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Got my final schedule. Last exam, May 22nd. Can we still leave for Italy on the 24th? I smiled, typing back. "Absolutely. Tickets confirmed yesterday. You, me, and your reluctant brother are officially Tuscany bound." The summer trip had been Sophia's idea, a celebration of her stellar freshman year of high school and a much-needed break for all of us after the tumultuous months following Christmas. Ethan had initially protested, claiming 3 weeks in Italy would be boring, but had gradually warmed to the idea after I mentioned the Ferrari factory tour I'd arranged. The vacation would mark our first significant family journey as a reconstructed unit, Kate and her children, without Michael. He would have the kids for 2 weeks in August, taking them to his new beach house in the Outer Banks, a property purchased with his portion of the divorce settlement. The settlement itself had been finalized more quickly than anyone predicted. After our lunch at Tersigell's, Michael had reviewed my proposed terms with his attorneys, made 3 modest counter-proposals, and accepted the adjusted agreement within a week. Whether motivated by guilt, pragmatism, or simply a desire for clean resolution, he had proved surprisingly reasonable once the initial shock of discovery had passed. Under the finalized terms, I maintained control of Duncan Reed with 65% ownership, while Michael retained 25% as a silent partner. The remaining 10% distributed among key executives through a newly established equity incentive program. The Emerson building transferred to his full ownership, free and clear of the leverage I had established through Harborview Investments. Our personal assets were divided with similar efficiency. I kept our primary residence and my separately maintained investments, while Michael received our vacation property in Vermont and a fair cash distribution. Most importantly, we established a generous educational trust for the children that neither of us could access for any other purpose. The divorce decree had been granted 60 days ago, the legal system moving with uncharacteristic speed given the clear documentation and mutual cooperation. The children had adjusted to their new schedule with remarkable resilience, spending weekdays and alternate weekends with me, while Michael had them for dinner one night each week and the remaining weekends. My intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflections. "Ms. Duncan, Samuel Abrams is on line 1. "Thank you, Leslie." I swiveled back to my desk and picked up the phone. "Sam, good afternoon. What news from the legal front?" "Good news, actually," my attorney replied. "The last of the client reassignment agreements has been executed. Every major account has formally confirmed their commitment to remain with Duncan Reed under your leadership." This represented the final professional separation from Michael, a comprehensive documentation that all client relationships now resided with the company rather than with him personally. It had been a necessary protective measure, eliminating any future claim he might make about his clients being solicited in violation of the non-compete provisions. "That's excellent," I said, feeling another piece of the complicated transition click into place. "Any word on the Harrington-Duncan venture?" Sam chuckled softly. "Funny you should ask. My sources tell me all is not harmonious in that partnership. Apparently, Harrington expected Michael to bring more existing client relationships with him, while Michael assumed Harrington's political connections would generate immediate project approvals. I wasn't particularly surprised. The alliance had seemed fundamentally mismatched from the beginning. Michael's community-centered development philosophy, learned during our years building Duncan Reed together, was fundamentally incompatible with Harrington's extract maximum profit approach. "Their Harbor Point proposal was rejected by the Planning Commission last week," Sam continued. "Insufficient community engagement and inadequate affordable housing component. Harrington apparently blamed Michael for failing to navigate the approval process successfully." I felt a moment of unexpected sympathy for my ex-husband. The skills he had taken for granted at Duncan Reed, the community relationships, the regulatory navigation, the balance of profitability and social responsibility had been supported by systems and teams I had built over years. Without that infrastructure, he was discovering the limitations of charm and deal-making ability alone. "Michael will adapt," I said, confident in his survival instincts if nothing else. "He's always been resilient." After completing the call, I returned to the quarterly financial review, making notes for Monday's leadership meeting. The afternoon passed in productive focus, the rhythm of strategic planning and decision-making providing a satisfaction that had been missing during my final years of marriage, when Michael had gradually edged me away from meaningful involvement in the company. At 5:30, I closed my laptop and gathered my things, maintaining the boundary between work and home life that had become important in my reconstructed routine. The children would be with Michael for dinner tonight, his regular Wednesday evening with them, giving me a rare, quiet evening to myself. As I drove through the city toward Roland Park, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected trajectory of the past 5 months. The initial shock and betrayal had given way to something I hadn't anticipated, a profound sense of reclaiming my authentic self, both professionally and personally. At home, I changed into casual clothes and opened the French doors leading to the garden patio. The spring plantings I'd selected had flourished, peonies, hydrangeas, and climbing roses creating a haven of color and fragrance. I poured a glass of wine and settled into a cushioned chair, enjoying the simple pleasure of solitude in beautiful surroundings. My phone rang. Dorothy Chen calling for our weekly check-in. She had become my closest confidant through the transition, her practical wisdom and occasional irreverent humor providing perspective when I needed it most. "If you're sitting in that garden with a glass of wine watching the sunset, I'm going to be incredibly jealous," she said by way of greeting. I laughed. "Guilty as charged. How did you know?" "Because it's Wednesday, the kids are with Michael, and you've developed pleasantly predictable habits in your new life." Her tone grew more serious. "Have you seen the Business Journal article about the Emerson building?" "Not yet." Should I be concerned? Not concerned, exactly. Just aware. Apparently, Michael's venture with Harrington is experiencing some growing pains. The Emerson building renovation is behind schedule and over budget. I sipped my wine thoughtfully. Sam mentioned their Harbor Point proposal was rejected. Sounds like they're struggling to find their footing. That's putting it mildly. The article suggests Harrington is reconsidering the partnership entirely. Dorothy paused. How do you feel about that? It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself recently. My initial anger toward Michael had gradually subsided, replaced by a more complex mixture of disappointment and distant concern. We would always be connected through our children, regardless of how our professional paths diverged. I don't wish him failure, I said honestly. But I don't feel responsible for his success either. Michael made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences, just as I'm living with mine. Spoken like a woman who has genuinely moved on, Dorothy observed approvingly. Which brings me to my actual reason for calling. Are you free for dinner this Friday? There's someone I'd like you to meet. I raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Dorothy Chen, are you attempting to set me up on a date? Not attempting, succeeding. David Lindstrom, architecture professor at Johns Hopkins, recently divorced, intelligent, thoughtful, and according to reliable sources, an excellent cook. You need to remember there's life beyond balance sheets and parenting schedules. Initial instinct was to decline. Dating seemed impossibly complicated, a distraction from the carefully calibrated life I was reconstructing. But Dorothy's description had piqued my interest despite my reservations. I'm having dinner with the children on Friday, I hedged. Michael's attending some industry event. Perfect. Saturday night instead. I've already confirmed he's available. We'll meet at Petit Louis, 7:30. Business casual, no pressure, just engaging adult conversation with someone who doesn't know your entire history. After we disconnected, I sat with the prospect of this unexpected development. Dating had seemed like a distant future consideration, not an immediate possibility. Yet Dorothy's matter-of-fact approach made it seem like a natural next step, rather than a momentous decision. The following evening, the children returned from their dinner with Michael, Sophia immediately disappearing upstairs to FaceTime with friends, while Ethan lingered in the kitchen, unusually talkative as he described the new office Michael had established in the Emerson building. It's pretty cool, he admitted, helping himself to ice cream. Lots of glass and these weird chairs that hang from the ceiling. But Dad seems kind of stressed. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, conscious of not placing Ethan in the middle of adult concerns. He shrugged, focused on his dessert. He was on the phone a lot. Something about financing and deadline extensions. When I asked about the Ferrari posters for my room at his new place, he said we'd talk about it later. Michael had recently purchased a condominium in Harbor East, having lived in a hotel suite for the first several months after Christmas. The children had been helping him furnish it, part of establishing their comfort with the dual home reality. I'm sure he's just busy with the new venture, I offered, not wanting Ethan to worry. Starting a new company is always challenging. Ethan looked up, his expression surprisingly perceptive for an 11-year-old. Is that why you're not stressed anymore? Because you didn't have to start over? The question caught me off guard with its insight. That's part of it, I acknowledged. But mostly it's because I'm doing work I love with people I trust, and I have you and Sophia as my priority outside of work. He nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Dad says he misses the Duncan Reed team, especially Harold. He says his new financial guy doesn't explain things clearly. I resisted. The urge to note that Michael had rarely appreciated Harold's meticulous explanations when they worked together. Instead, I steered the conversation toward Ethan's upcoming cello recital, allowing him the space to shift from messenger to simply being a child with his own concerns and excitements. Later, after both children were settled in their rooms, I found myself drawn to my home office, curiosity piqued by Ethan's casual observations. I opened my laptop and searched for the Business Journal article Dorothy had mentioned. The headline was more pointed than I expected. Harrington Duncan Venture faces setbacks as flagship project stalls. The accompanying photo showed the Emerson building with construction equipment visible but seemingly idle. The article detailed the partnership's difficulties, financing challenges, regulatory hurdles, and rumors of internal disagreements about project direction. One quote from an unnamed source particularly stood out. Michael Duncan's approach at Duncan Reed Properties was built on community integration and sustainable growth. That philosophy seems at odds with Harrington's more aggressive development model. Industry observers question whether this partnership can reconcile such fundamental differences in approach. I closed the article, feeling an unexpected twist of emotion. The philosophy attributed to Michael had actually been mine: the community, integration model, the sustainability focus, the balanced approach to growth and social responsibility. These were principles I had championed, often against Michael's impatience for faster returns and higher profit margins. Yet in our years together, these values had become associated with Duncan Reed as a whole, and by extension, with Michael as its public face. Now, separated from the infrastructure and team that had implemented those values, he was struggling to deliver on expectations he had never fully embraced. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it provided no satisfaction. Whatever our personal history, I recognized the professional challenge he faced, trying to establish a new identity while carrying the reputation and expectations from his previous role. I closed my laptop, deciding not to delve further into Michael's business challenges. We had established clear boundaries, both legally and personally. His professional success or failure was his own responsibility now, just as Duncan Reed's future rested primarily in my hands. Saturday evening arrived with unexpected nervousness as I prepared for dinner with David Lindstrom. I had changed outfits twice before settling on a simple wrap dress in deep blue, elegant without appearing to try too hard. The children were spending the weekend with Michael, giving me rare freedom from parenting responsibilities. Petit Louis was bustling when I arrived, the French bistro's warm lighting and animated conversations creating an atmosphere of convivial sophistication. Dorothy waved from a corner table where she sat with a tall, silver-haired man who rose as I approached. "Kate, finally!" Dorothy embraced me briefly before turning to her companion. "This is David Lindstrom. David, Kate Duncan." "A pleasure to meet you," he said, his voice carrying a slight Midwestern cadence. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine without being overly familiar. "Dorothy has told me about your work with sustainable urban development. It sounds fascinating." Dinner progressed with surprising ease. David was intelligent and thoughtful, asking insightful questions about Duncan Reed's approach to community engagement and sharing his own perspective on architectural trends that prioritized human experience. Visual impact. He spoke briefly about his 2 college-aged children, his teaching at Johns Hopkins, and his recent sabbatical in Copenhagen studying urban design innovations. The Danes have mastered the integration of community spaces within dense urban environments, he explained over dessert. There's much American developers could learn from their approach. "That's exactly what we're attempting with the Aston Street project," I found myself responding with genuine enthusiasm. "Creating a development that serves essential workers while fostering community connections rather than just providing housing units." Dorothy, who had masterfully facilitated conversation throughout dinner, suddenly glanced at her watch with unconvincing surprise. "Is that the time? I have an early meeting tomorrow with clients in D.C. She gathered her things, waving away. Our protests. "You two continue discussing Danish urban planning innovations. David, make sure Kate gets safely to her car." After she departed, leaving behind the subtle scent of her signature perfume and the unmistakable atmosphere of a well-executed setup. David and I exchanged amused glances. "Dorothy is not known for her subtlety," he observed, signaling for coffee. "No, but she is known for her excellent judgment," I replied, accepting the tacit agreement to extend our evening. The conversation shifted to personal territories: his divorce 3 years earlier after 20 years of marriage, my more recent separation, and the professional complications it entailed. There was something refreshing about sharing these experiences with someone who understood loss and renewal but had no stake in my particular story. The hardest part, he reflected, wasn't the practical adjustments. Those come with time. It was recognizing myself as an individual again, not as half of a partnership that defined my identity for 2 decades. His observation resonated deeply. "I'm still navigating that transition," I admitted. "Professionally, it's been clarifying, returning to my authentic vision without compromise. But personally," I searched for the right words, "I'm rediscovering aspects of myself that had been gradually set aside, preferences and perspectives that got lost in the process of maintaining what I thought was a successful marriage." "Like what?" he asked, his interest genuine rather than merely polite. I considered the question thoughtfully. "Simple things at first: music choices, travel destinations, how I spend Sunday mornings." I smiled, remembering my recent rediscovery of jazz brunches and art gallery visits. But also deeper values: how I view success, what legacy I want to create, how I demonstrate priorities to my children. David nodded with understanding. The reclamation of self happens in layers. 3 years in, I'm still discovering preferences I had forgotten or never fully explored. When we finally left the restaurant, the night air had turned cool and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. David walked me to my car, maintaining a respectful distance that I found oddly appealing. After years of Michael's automatic physicality, "I enjoyed this evening," he said simply as we reached my vehicle. "I'd like to see you again, perhaps show you the architectural exhibition at the Walters next weekend. But I also understand if you're not ready for that yet." His directness, coupled with sensitivity, was refreshing. No games, no pressure, just honest expression of interest balanced with respect for my circumstances. "I'd like that," I found myself saying. "The children will be with their father next Saturday afternoon. Would 2 o'clock work?" We exchanged phone numbers, and he waited until I was safely in my car before walking toward his own. As I drove home, I felt a curious lightness that had nothing to do with romantic possibilities and everything to do with the simple pleasure of engaging conversation with someone who saw me clearly, without the distorting lens of past history or future expectations. Sunday morning brought perfect May weather, and I decided to indulge in one of my reclaimed pleasures: the farmers' market in Waverly, followed by coffee at a small patisserie that Michael had always dismissed as pretentiously French. I was examining heirloom tomatoes at a local farm stand when an unexpected voice broke through the market's cheerful bustle. "Kate, I thought that might be you." I turned to find Michael standing a few feet away, holding a paper bag from the artisanal bakery at the market's entrance. He looked different somehow, still handsome and well-dressed in casual weekend attire, but slightly less polished than his usual professional appearance. There was a new weathering to his features, a subtle evidence of stress that hadn't been present during our marriage. "Michael." I nodded, maintaining the cordial distance we had established in our limited interactions since finalizing the divorce. "I didn't expect to see you here. The children mentioned you were taking them to the harbor this weekend." "Later today," he confirmed. "Sophia wanted to finish a project first, and Ethan's still sleeping. Teenage scheduling at its finest." He gestured vaguely toward the bakery. "I remembered you always liked their sourdough." The comment caught me off guard. A small acknowledgement of preferences and habits shared over 15 years, now separated by legal documents and restructured lives. They make excellent pain au chocolat as well, I offered, a minor reciprocation of his attempt at normalcy. An awkward silence fell between us, filled with the market's ambient noise, vendors calling out specials, children laughing, musicians playing acoustic guitar near the entrance. We had not encountered each other unexpectedly like this before. Our interactions since Christmas carefully scheduled and usually involving the children as buffers. "How's the Emerson building coming along?" I asked finally, choosing neutral professional territory. Something flickered across his expression: frustration, resignation, or perhaps simple fatigue. "Challenging," he admitted. "The renovation has hit some unexpected complications, and Harrington and I have different visions for the eventual tenant mix." I nodded, unsurprised by this confirmation of what the business press had already reported. Mixed-use developments always involve balancing competing priorities. It takes time to find the right equilibrium. "You always made it look easier than it actually is," he said. The comment delivered with a self-deprecating smile that contained a hint of genuine acknowledgement. "The systems you built at Duncan Reed, I didn't fully appreciate their value until they weren't there anymore." The admission, however small, represented a shift from the defensive posture he had maintained since Christmas. I wasn't sure how to respond, wary of being pulled into offering business advice to my ex-husband while standing among vegetable displays on a Sunday morning. "You'll develop new systems," I said finally. "Different ones, aligned with whatever direction you and Harrington ultimately determine makes sense." He nodded, though his expression suggested limited confidence in that outcome. "How's Aston Street progressing?" Ethan mentioned the groundbreaking ceremony went well. It did. We're finally moving forward with the full vision: affordable housing for healthcare workers, integrated community spaces, sustainable design elements, everything we originally planned. The "we" slipped out before I could catch it, a linguistic ghost of our former partnership. Michael noticed, a shadow crossing his face briefly before he composed himself. "That's good. It was always a worthwhile concept." Another pause, then. "The Business Journal did a feature on Duncan Reed last week. Very positive. You've clearly steadied the ship effectively." "More than steadied," I corrected gently. "We're expanding. 2 new projects breaking ground this quarter, and the Westfield Tower ahead of schedule." He absorbed this information with a nod that contained both acknowledgement and something more complex. Perhaps regret, perhaps simple recognition of what he had relinquished. "I should let you get back to your shopping," he said, glancing at his watch. "The children will be expecting me soon." As he turned to leave, a sudden impulse prompted me to speak. "Michael." He paused, looking back. Questioningly, "If you're having specific challenges with the mixed-use balance at the Emerson building, Harold Chen developed an excellent modeling tool for tenant distribution. It might be helpful." The offer surprised us both. A small professional courtesy, extended across the chasm of our personal history. "Thank you," he said after a moment. "I'd appreciate that. I'll have Leslie email it to you Monday." I turned back to the tomatoes, a subtle indication that our unexpected encounter had reached its natural conclusion. As I completed my shopping and headed toward the patisserie for my planned coffee, I reflected on the brief interaction. There had been no drama, no lingering resentment coloring the exchange, just 2 professionals with shared history and separate futures, navigating an unexpected moment of convergence. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something less adversarial than I might have predicted in the raw aftermath of discovery and separation. A recognition, perhaps, that our lives would continue to intersect in both expected and unexpected ways, and that finding a sustainable mode of interaction served everyone's interests, especially our children's. At the patisserie, I selected a table by the window, ordering my coffee and pain au chocolat with simple pleasure. The Sunday edition of the Baltimore Sun lay on the adjacent chair, and I browsed it leisurely, enjoying the luxury of unstructured time. The real estate section included a small article about the upcoming summer auction of a historic property in Mount Vernon, a 19th-century townhouse with potential for renovation as either a residential showcase or boutique professional. Offices. The listing agent's description emphasized its architectural significance and prime location near cultural institutions. I studied the photograph with growing interest, mentally calculating potential acquisition costs and renovation requirements. Duncan Reed had not previously ventured into historic preservation projects, but the company's evolution under my renewed leadership had opened possibilities beyond our traditional development model. I took a photo of the article with my phone, making a note to discuss it with the acquisition team on Monday. This was the freedom I had reclaimed, the ability to pursue opportunities based on my own assessment of their value and alignment with my vision, without navigating the compromises of partnership. As I sipped my coffee and watched Sunday morning unfold outside the window, families strolling with farmers' market purchases, couples walking dogs, neighbors greeting each other in the spring sunshine, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle around me. The path that had brought me here had been unexpected and painful. The Christmas dinner that had exposed Michael's deception had initially seemed like an ending of my marriage, of the life I had built, of the future I had anticipated. Instead, it had become a powerful beginning. I had brought papers showing I owned his office building to our family Christmas dinner. He had brought his girlfriend, expecting to control the narrative of our dissolution on his terms. Neither of us could have predicted the ultimate outcome, not just a divided life and restructured company, but my fundamental reclamation of professional purpose and personal identity. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from David Lindstrom. Enjoyed our conversation last night. Looking forward to the exhibition next weekend. If you're interested, there's a lecture on sustainable urban design at Hopkins Wednesday evening as well. I smiled, typing back, Wednesday works. Send details. The future stretched before me, not as a predetermined path, but as a landscape of possibilities I was newly empowered to explore. Professional innovations, personal discoveries, relationships, based on mutual respect rather than convenient accommodation. The papers I had placed beside the Christmas pudding 5 months ago had done more than secure my financial position. They had catalyzed a profound transformation that continued to unfold in unexpected and rewarding ways. Outside the patisserie, Baltimore beckoned with Sunday morning tranquility. I headed toward my car, mentally sketching plans for the afternoon. Perhaps the art museum, perhaps simply time in my garden with a good book. The choice was entirely mine, and that freedom, to choose, to direct, to define my own experience, was perhaps the most valuable asset I had reclaimed from the ashes of betrayal. From the terrace of the hillside villa, Tuscany unfurled before me like a Renaissance painting. Golden wheat fields, silvery olive groves, and vineyards stitching the landscape into orderly rows. The June sun bathed everything in amber light as it descended toward the cypress-lined horizon, turning the infinity pool to liquid gold. Inside, I could hear Sophia and Ethan bickering good-naturedly over dinner preparations, their voices mixing with Italian pop music streaming from Sophia's phone. 2 weeks into our Italian sojourn, I had finally mastered the art of il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. Each morning began with espresso on this same terrace, watching mist rise from the valleys while planning our leisurely adventures. Afternoons brought explorations of medieval hill towns, art museums, or simply the local markets where my rudimentary Italian and the children's fearless attempts at communication earned us warm smiles from shopkeepers. The transformation in all three of us was remarkable. Ethan, initially bored by the prospect of Italy, had become fascinated with Roman history after our visit to an archaeological site. Sophia had abandoned her perpetual connection to social media in favor of filling a sketchbook with watercolors of the landscape. and I had rediscovered a capacity for simple joy that had been dormant for longer than I cared to admit. My phone buzzed with an incoming email, temporarily pulling me back to professional realities. The historic Mount Vernon townhouse I had, spotted in the newspaper before our departure, had officially entered Duncan Reed's portfolio. Harold's message confirmed the acquisition had closed successfully, with preliminary renovation plans already under development by our architectural team. I sent a brief response, then deliberately set my phone aside. One of my vacation rules was limited work engagement, no more than 30 minutes each morning, and occasional check-ins like this one. The discipline had proven surprisingly liberating, revealing how much of my reconstituted identity remained tied to professional achievement, despite my conscious efforts at balance. "Mom!" Sophia called from inside. "Come taste this sauce before Ethan ruins it with more garlic." "It needs garlic," Ethan protested. "The cookbook says so." I smiled, taking one last look at the golden landscape before heading inside. The rental villa's kitchen was a wonderful chaos of ingredients spread across marble countertops, open cookbook pages stained with olive oil fingerprints, and my children's animated faces as they collaborated on our evening meal. "Let me taste," I said, accepting the wooden spoon Sophia thrust toward me. The tomato sauce was bright with fresh basil and, yes, plenty of garlic. "It's perfect. Maybe a little more salt." Ethan shot his sister a triumphant look. "Told you the garlic was right." Cooking together had become our evening ritual, each of us taking turns selecting recipes from the villa's collection of Italian cookbooks. Tonight was PCL ragu, hand-rolled pasta with a slow-simmered sauce featuring the wild boar that was a Tuscan specialty. The meal would be simple by local standards but represented culinary ambition for us, especially 13-year-old Ethan, who had discovered an unexpected passion for cooking. "Did David text back about those restaurant recommendations in Florence?" Sophia asked casually, returning to her pasta rolling. I glanced at her, noting the studied nonchalance that failed to mask her interest. Both children had been surprisingly receptive to David's occasional appearance in our lives over the past month, perhaps because he maintained a respectful distance while still showing genuine interest in their activities. "Yes, actually. He sent a list this morning, apparently a colleague of his lives in Florence part of the year. I was thinking we might try one of them tomorrow after the Uffizi." Sophia nodded approvingly. "Cool. Does he miss you?" The question was delivered with calculated innocence, her eyes fixed firmly on the pasta dough. "We're enjoying getting to know each other," I replied carefully. "But it's very new, and we're both proceeding thoughtfully." What I didn't share was how refreshing that thoughtfulness felt, the absence of pressure, the space to discover compatibility at our own pace. David and I had attended several cultural events together before my departure for Italy, each encounter revealing new layers of common interests and complementary perspectives. Our communications during my travels had maintained that same easy rhythm, occasional texts sharing observations or recommendations, brief video calls that focused more on ideas than emotions. "He seems nice," Ethan offered unexpectedly, looking up from his garlic chopping. "Not trying too hard, you know? Like Mom's friend, not just some random guy." The assessment was so perfectly Ethan, straightforward, perceptive, slightly awkward, that I had to smile. "That's a good description, actually. And yes, he is nice." The conversation drifted to our plans for Florence the next day. The dinner preparations continued, and soon we were seated on the terrace as the first stars appeared, above the darkening landscape. The pasta was rustic but delicious. The local wine perfectly complemented the meal, and the children entertained me with increasingly elaborate plans for the Ferrari factory tour scheduled for later in the week. After dinner, Sophia disappeared, to call friends back home despite the time difference, while Ethan settled in the villa's small library with a book about Roman military tactics. I returned to the terrace with a glass of wine, savoring the night sounds of rural Tuscany, distant church bells, an occasional car navigating the winding road below, cicadas creating their summer symphony from the olive groves. My phone lit up with a text, not from David as I half expected, but from Michael. Transferred additional funds for the kids' expenses. How's Italy? Ethan mentioned Ferrari excitement in our call yesterday. The message was typical of our recent communications, practical, cordial, focused primarily on the children. In the month since our divorce had finalized, we had gradually established a functional co-parenting relationship built on limited but respectful interaction. The business entanglements had been similarly addressed through proper channels, with Michael honoring the terms of our settlement agreement without attempting to renegotiate or interfere with Duncan Reed's operations. I replied with a brief update about the children's adventures and a photo of Ethan proudly displaying pasta he had made from scratch, knowing Michael would appreciate this glimpse into his son's new interest. Our ability to share these moments without emotional complications felt like significant progress from the raw aftermath of Christmas. Reports from Baltimore suggested Michael's professional situation had stabilized somewhat after the initial challenges with Edward Harrington. They had scaled back their partnership to focus exclusively on the Emerson building, with Michael reportedly seeking separate investors for future projects more aligned with his development philosophy. The modeling tool Harold had provided had apparently proven useful in reconfiguring the building's tenant mix to balance profitability with sustainability. I set aside these thoughts of Baltimore and business, returning my attention to the spectacular night sky above the Tuscan hills. This vacation represented more than a simple holiday. It was a deliberate milestone marking our family's successful navigation of radical change. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting peacefully on an Italian terrace, content with both my professional direction and personal evolution. The temperature dropped as night fully descended, and I moved inside, checking on the children, before retiring to my bedroom. Sophia was still chatting animatedly with friends, sharing Italian adventures and collecting hometown updates. Ethan had fallen asleep with his Roman military book open across his chest, reading lamps still illuminating pages of battle formations and legion structures. I gently removed the book and turned off the light, pulling a light blanket over him. These quiet moments of maternal tenderness had acquired new significance in our reconfigured family life. Opportunities to reinforce stability and security amid change. In my own room, I opened the French doors to the balcony, allowing the night breeze to fill the space with the scent of jasmine and rosemary from the villa's garden. On the antique writing desk lay my leather-bound journal, a habit rediscovered in the aftermath of divorce. Tonight's entry would capture the simple perfection of our day: the morning drive to a neighboring village, the surprise of finding a tiny art gallery featuring contemporary Italian painters, Ethan's determined pasta making, Sophia's growing confidence with conversational Italian. These ordinary moments, strung together like perfectly matched pearls, had gradually replaced the initial shock and pain of Michael's betrayal. The manila envelope containing papers showing my ownership of his office building had been necessary and strategic. But the true victory lay not in that dramatic confrontation, but in the life I had reclaimed and reshaped afterward. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.